It's Friday, it's 12:15, and this is Politics UK. Welcome to your weekly roundup of parliamentary highlights. I'll be joined by correspondents in Edinburgh and Cardiff, and here in Westminster by our parliamentary correspondent Susan Hume.
The vote in favour of having confidence in Boris Johnson as leader was 211 votes, and the vote against was 148 votes.
On the programme this week, Boris Johnson survives a vote of confidence among Conservative MPs, but will the wound inflicted by the challenge prove fatal to his premiership?
This week's events, Mr Speaker, have demonstrated just how loathed this Prime Minister is. And that's only in his own party.
In a long political career so far, I have, of course, picked up, barely begun, I have, of course, picked up political opponents all over the place.
Joy at Wales qualifying for the World Cup extends to all sides in the Welsh Senate.
How proud we all are as a Senate of their tremendous success.
Let's start with events here in Westminster with Susan Hume. Susan, it's been something of a pretty momentous week. 4 days of the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, swiftly followed by the announcement of that vote of confidence in Boris Johnson by backbench Conservative MPs. What happened and why now?
Well, the backdrop, of course, is that increasing unease among Conservatives about Boris Johnson's leadership. A few of them, I suspect, were never big fans of his. Others, I think, probably were unhappy about the lockdown parties. And that was turbocharged, really, by that Sue Gray report, which had some pretty lurid details, really, about the culture in Downing Street. I suspect the Prime Minister had hoped that this would all blow over during Parliament's week away for the Platinum Jubilee. But in fact, it seemed to have got rather worse. So by the end of the week, it turns out that the unhappiness had reached that trigger point where there was going to be a vote of confidence among Conservative MPs. That's not all MPs, just Conservative ones to have him as leader. So that was Sunday night. The Prime Minister was told about that. Vote was going to happen straight away on Monday night. So Monday was a really feverish day in Westminster. We had some Conservatives coming out saying they supported the Prime Minister's, others saying they didn't, quite a lot keeping stum about the whole thing. So we didn't really know what the result would be until it was announced late on Monday evening. And the Prime Minister did win, but not by the thumping margin he might have liked.
The vote in favour of having confidence in Boris Johnson as leader was 211 votes, and the vote against was 148 votes. And therefore, I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
As you say, Susan, the atmosphere had reached something of a fever pitch by Monday evening, and then, of course, it was over by Tuesday morning. But how did those developments go down in the House of Commons?
Right, so Wednesday, and it's the regular Prime Minister's question time, and I think the Prime Minister must have entered that chamber with a deal of trepidation, really, because 4 out of 10 of his own MPs had not supported him. 6 out of 10 did, but 4 out of 10 is still quite a lot. So, in fact, I think it might not have been so bad for him in that Prime Minister's question session as he might have feared. His supporters gave him a big cheer as he walked in. His critics on the Conservative benches actually kept quiet, and the Labour leader himself talked about something else. He asked about health for the most part. However, it couldn't be avoided altogether. One Labour MP had the very first question, and she went right for the jugular.
This week's events, Mr Speaker, have demonstrated just how loathed this Prime Minister is. And that's only in his own party. So as his administration is too distracted by its internal divisions to deal with the challenges we face, can the Prime Minister explain if 148 of his own backbenchers don't trust him, why on earth should the country?
I thank the Right Honourable Lady very much for her question, and I can assure her that in a long political career so far, I have, of course, picked up, barely begun, I have, of course, picked up political opponents all over the place. And that is because this government has done some very big and very remarkable things which they did not necessarily approve of.
Why did his culture secretary, I think hiding along the bench, say that successive Conservative governments left our health service wanting and inadequate when the pandemic hit?
The UK government and our amazing NHS, produced, not only approved the first vaccine anywhere in the world. We were the first to get it into anybody's arms, Mr. Speaker, and we had the fastest rollout anywhere in Europe, none of which would have been possible if we'd listened to him.
He's been in power for 3 years, and things are getting worse, not better. Fewer GPs, more waits for cancer tests, buildings still crumbling, and he's changing the rules to cover up his failure.
When you look at what this government is doing, the massive, and I must say this to him, we are making colossal investments in our NHS. We are cutting waiting times, we're raising standards, we're paying nurses more, we're supporting our fantastic NHS. And by the way, he continually came to this, I don't just remind him of this, and said that we had the worst COVID record in Europe. Turned out to be completely untrue. He still hasn't retracted it. We're doing it, Mr. Speaker. We can make those investments because of the strength of the UK economy, because of the fiscal firepower that we have to deploy. We have the lowest unemployment now since 1974, and we are going to continue to grow our economy for the long term.
The Prime Minister is acting like Monty Python's Black Knight, running around declaring it's just a flesh wound. And no amount of delusion and denial will save the Prime Minister from the truth. This story won't go away until he goes away. For once in his life, he needs to wake up to reality. Prime Minister, it's over. It's done. The Prime Minister has no options left, but Scotland does. Scotland has the choice of an independent future.
Mr. Speaker, we had a referendum, as I've told the House before, in 2014. I think he should respect the mandate of the people. And he keeps saying that he wants his independence for his country. Our country is independent, Mr. Speaker. Our country is independent. He tried 48 times to reverse it to the leader of the opposition. And the only way that independence would ever be reversed is if we had the disaster, Mr. Speaker, of a Labour SNP coalition to take us back into the EU.
So Boris Johnson there in the House of Commons, Susan. The Prime Minister, of course, still faces an investigation by the Privileges Committee, doesn't he? Where does that all leave the whole debate around standards, moral standards and ethics in public life?
Yeah, exactly, Jill. That is the thread that runs through all of this. And the Prime Minister separately has been accused in recent weeks of trying to water down the ministerial code. And also his ethics advisor, if I can say it, his ethics advisor, Lord Geidt, has said that he would like the power to be able to initiate inquiries into ministerial wrongdoing off his own bat. Boris Johnson has said no, he still wants to have the final say on whether an inquiry can go ahead. And that's because how can you have an elected person being investigated by some unelected person sitting in an office? The elected people are answerable to the voters, not to some grey person in an office. However, Boris Johnson's critics have said, yeah, that works, but what if you then block an inquiry into the Prime Minister's own conduct? The normal rules don't apply because this is a Prime Minister who has been prepared to break the rules, perhaps.
Here in this House, we are proud of the constituents we represent, and I'm no different. From Droylsden School to St Peter's and St Mary's and our town team to Tameside Markets, Ashton-under-Lyne did our country proud this past weekend, and I'm proud of our British values and the community I come from. We all are. But the conduct of this Prime Minister undermines those values, rigging the rules that he himself is under investigation for breaching, downgrading standards, debasing the principles of public life before our very eyes. And while the advisor on standards may have been granted a swanky new website and an office, he still fundamentally requires the Prime Minister's permission to launch any investigation, making the Prime Minister the judge and jury in his very own personal courtroom. It's no wonder his own standards advisor has criticised him for his low ambition on standards.
This is a constitutional imperative. The Prime Minister is head of Her Majesty's government. He is accountable for the conduct of the executive. He is accountable for the conduct of the executive, and that authority and that accountability derives from the Prime Minister's ability to command the confidence of this House. Now, that derives from the members of this House, including those who hold office, all of us, at the behest of the electorate. This government is committed to maintaining that constitutional position and the accountability of the Prime Minister, including in decisions. If we usurp that and hand that authority to someone who doesn't have electoral accountability, that would be a constitutional irregularity.
The proposal here is to set up an unelected individual charged with this godlike power to judge the morals of ministers. The Right Honourable Lady talked about Russia. I mean, this is an echo of the political commissars who sit alongside politicians judging them on their conformity to moral standards or to ideology. This is not the British way, and I appreciate that Labour don't like the fact that they are in a minority in this House. They don't like not getting their way, particularly on a question of public morals, and I sympathise with them. They don't like the Prime Minister, and I sympathise. While I disagree.
The idea that the mea culpas that we have heard from the Prime Minister, I think, have been fundamentally undermined if it is true, as it is reported, that last night in the 1922 committee he said, "I do it all again." It is difficult to see, if that is correct, how the apologies that have been given to this House and to the public are in any way sincere.
Thank you very much, Susan, for now. We'll be back shortly. Let's go to Holyrood now and our Scotland political correspondent, Lindsay Bewes. Hello to you, Lindsay. The Scottish Government's been under scrutiny this week over cuts to public services, hasn't it?
Yes, that's right. The Scottish Government's spending review for the next 5 years suggests real-term cuts to several areas of the public sector. The Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, has said she wants to do a bit of a reset, and that will mean job cuts as the government seeks to move the public sector workforce back to pre-pandemic levels, albeit without compulsory redundancies. Now, that has meant that opposition parties have been scrutinising Ms Forbes over her handling of Scotland's public finances.
I'm sure that the public will find it very difficult indeed to understand why on earth such substantial real-term cuts are to be made to the following: to our police, who are on the front line of keeping our communities safe, to local government services, to trade and enterprise, to tourism, and to our universities, which the Cabinet Secretary admitted yesterday are integral to the realisation of the National Economic Transformation Strategy and which play such a vital role when it comes to developing research and development and innovation. And this is exactly the same public who will see the profligacy of the SNP government wasting vast sums of public money on ferries that don't sail, BIFAB, Prestwick Airport, the malicious Rangers prosecution, the list goes on. And of course there is the 20 million preparing for a second referendum. Yes, I will take an intervention. Stuart McMillan.
Presiding Officer, what this debate is really about is why and how Scotland cannot afford to remain under UK Tory rule. It is more than a little ironic that the Conservatives have initiated today's debate on the economy when their Westminster leaders are presiding over the sharpest fall in living standards and the fastest rise in inflation for a generation. They are the very symbol right now across the world of economic mismanagement. The OECD has warned that next year the UK will have the worst economic growth of any G20 country bar Russia. Under the current devolution settlement, only the UK government has the macroeconomic levers to fully address the cost of living crisis, and they have spectacularly failed to manage our economy in a way that works for businesses and works for households. Poverty is rising, costs are rising, the energy price cap is rising, living standards are falling, growth rates are dropping and competitiveness is sliding under the Conservatives.
I agree with much of what the Cabinet Secretary says. The Conservatives are doing an absolutely appalling job at running the economy, but isn't that making the case of why we should be doing better? Because while we may not have all the levers he wants, we do have levers, which does not explain why wage growth is underperforming in Scotland compared to the UK average. Can she explain that?
Now, you heard there Kate Forbes being pressed on Scotland's economic performance relative to the UK's. Now, her argument is that she doesn't have the macroeconomic levers here at Holyrood that exist at Westminster. The SNP trying to use this to advance their case for independence. But certainly, look, in the short term, that's not going to cut any ice with those parts of the public sector who are going to be feeling the squeeze.
Well, let's talk about another industry, part of the economy, that they were also facing questions over, and that's continuing problems on the railways. Tell us about that.
Yes, indeed. There has been a pay dispute between ScotRail and the trade union representing drivers that had resulted in a reduced timetable here on Scotland's rail network. That is because drivers had been refusing to work overtime or on their rest days. That has been causing a lot of disruption. And ScotRail is now in public ownership, so there have been a lot of questions for the Transport Minister over what her role has been in trying to resolve that.
In response to my questioning in committee, the Minister told me that the key, indeed the sole change from nationalisation, was that she would be accountable. So does the Minister recognise the concerns of people who might think that in refusing to step into this situation, she's abdicating that accountability?
Minister.
I say to the member, I am accountable. I'm here today answering an urgent question. I was here yesterday answering a topical question on rail. I was here the week before answering a question on rail. And the week before that, he has absolute accountability
Minister, Minister, please resume your seat. Okay. I would just like a bit of calm from all parts of the chamber so that we can hear the answer to the question that the member asked. Minister, please continue.
Presiding Officer, as I outlined, I think in response to Mr Simpson, it would not be appropriate for me as Minister to be in the negotiating room. No ministers, to my mind, are ever in the negotiating room. It is appropriate in this instance for ScotRail to be in the negotiating room as the employer with our trade union partners, and I look forward to them reaching a resolution so we can restore ScotRail's full timetable for the benefit of passengers and staff alike.
So, Joe, things getting pretty fiery in the chamber here at Holyrood there, perhaps demonstrating the level of pressure that ministers have been under. That is a consequence of taking ScotRail into public ownership, because the buck has stopped with the Scottish Government in trying to resolve that. And some have said that has also put the trade union ASLEF in a pretty strong negotiating position. They managed to get an offer of 5% on the table, up from the 2.2% pay offer that had originally been put forward.
Very lively there in the chamber. Now, it's also been reported that NHS waiting times increased in Scotland. What's been said about that at First Minister's questions?
Yeah, well, both the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross and Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar raised this issue around waiting times at First Minister's questions. Anna Sarwar pointed to the 10,000 children and young people who are waiting for mental health treatment, and Douglas Ross going on the number of patients who've been waiting for longer than 2 years for treatment, that number now sitting at 10,600 people.
This isn't the NHS recovery her government promised. Things are getting worse, far worse, not better, First Minister. Now we're hearing of heart patients being given appointments 2 years down the line. Reports today state people are receiving appointment dates in July 2024. First Minister, is that acceptable?
In terms of the particular case cited in the media today, no, I don't think that is acceptable, and I know that a review of that particular appointment, which is a follow-up outpatient appointment, not a first outpatient appointment, is being undertaken, and contact with the patient will be made. It is the case that waiting times generally, and those waiting an unacceptably long time for treatment, has increased over the past year. I'm afraid that is the impact of a global pandemic. We have, over the past year, seen further waves of COVID that has had a big impact on the number of treatments that can be done in our National Health Service, as infection control measures have had to be tightened up, and of course as a number of staff have themselves had COVID and been off sick.
Why does Nicola Sturgeon think it's acceptable to use the same hollow words year after year for 8 years while nothing changes, families are left to suffer and kids are left to pick up the pieces on their own?
First Minister. Well, that is not the case. What we see with mental health treatment is more people coming forward for treatment. More people are being seen for treatment, but we are building services. So Anas Sarwar has put forward what he describes as solutions. He has not said anything today that is not already being done and happening.
So the First Minister being quite clear there that you can't separate what's happening with waiting times right now from the impact of the pandemic. She's arguing the government is taking action. That's things like recruiting more staff, although that will take time. And the challenge is now for the government to try to drive down those waiting time numbers, and there are going to be ongoing questions about how well it is doing in trying to address that.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Lindsay Bewes there at Holyrood. Let's return to Westminster. Susan, the Health Secretary was in the news this week when he was reported to have compared the NHS to the old video rental company Blockbusters. What was he driving at?
Yeah, I think perhaps we should explain for younger viewers, should we, Jill?
I agree.
What Blockbuster is. Back in the old days, before video streaming, you used to have to go along with your membership card, find out if they'd got a film that you wanted in stock and take it home and bring it back again afterwards. Now, the Health Secretary was suggesting that the NHS is a bit like that, a bit old-fashioned and a bit cumbersome, and that this all needed to be digitalised and streamlined and made more efficient. However, of course, as we were hearing from Holyrood there, it's the staff that really matter, and having the right staff in place is what MPs on the Health Committee really wanted to ask him about, and putting some quite distressing stories again about people waiting for GPs appointments, that kind of thing.
In November, you told us that you didn't think we were on track to get an extra 6,000 GPs by 2024, which is the new target.
Yeah.
What have you done since then to help get us on track in terms of getting more GPs into the system?
We're trying to recruit GPs at the fastest possible rate that we possibly can. I think it's fair to say we're doing all that we can, as well as more GPs sort of getting them in to general practice. We've been trying to also focus with our friends in the NHS on retention, so trying to look at some of those issues that may consider GPs to leave early.
I wondered if I may read to you a letter from one of my constituents struggling to access a GP practice called Teldoc in Telford, which services 60,000 patients in my constituency. Please help me with Teldoc. I would like your help and advice. I had a heart attack and I've spent 3 days trying to contact them and I gave up. On numerous occasions, as of this morning, 30 seconds into the call, the phone system closed down and it's still locked down. I've been to the surgery, got turned away and told the only way that I can book is through the phone. This is not a one-off, it's a daily occurrence. Trying to get basic healthcare is a joke in Telford.
We need more GPs. We're hiring more GPs. We've got more GPs in training in medical school than ever before, and as I mentioned earlier, we removed the caps recently on that as well. Also, and I think this is of crucial importance, when it comes to primary care, it's not just about GPs. There are many other very important, valuable primary care staff, professions, and we're hiring those at a record rate as well. I may have mentioned earlier that we have a commitment as a government to get 26,000 more by the end of this Parliament, and we are on track with that with 18,000 more, and that's crucial. That's all on track, and alongside that then managed to increase the number of appointments, and we are increasing the number of appointments. It might not feel like that in many areas because demand has also increased to see GPs.
It's being reported widely that you told the Cabinet that the NHS is like a blockbuster video store in the age of Netflix. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, first of all, you'll know from Cabinet that you never talk publicly about what's discussed privately in Cabinet. But what I will say, and hopefully this goes to answer your question, I've talked very much already about, publicly many times, about the importance of modernising the NHS. The NHS is absolutely fantastic. We all rely on it, but much of how it's set up is still very much 1948. We need to be thinking about 2048 and how we get from here to the needs of the British population when it comes to health in 2048. Yeah. And that means modernisation of structures, of systems, using much more digital and technology, for example, to make sure it's still there for us, free at the point of use, world quality healthcare, but a modernised system. And I don't know whether you were a member of Blockbuster, but at some point you must have given that up and taken up Netflix, and if so, then maybe you understand that even more.
Indeed.
Always slightly awkward there, isn't it, Susan, when a conversation you had in Cabinet leaks out. Anyway, we'll leave it there for now. Off to Wales. It's been an eventful week. Our political reporter, Kemlyn Davis, joins us now from the Senedd at Cardiff Bay. Kemlyn, the Health Minister made an important statement about the Health Board we've talked about before in North Wales this week. What did she have to say?
Yes, that's right, Joe. The Betsy Cadwaladr Health Board in North Wales has been under the spotlight for the wrong reasons for several years now. And on Tuesday, the Health Minister announced that vascular services and emergency care at Ysbyty Glan-Clwyd Hospital in Denbighshire were being placed under targeted intervention. Now, that's the second highest level of Welsh Government oversight. And this follows criticism of those services in recent reviews. This is what the Health Minister had to say.
The situation in Betsy is unacceptable and it needs serious work and efforts to correct. Services are not as good as they should be, and we are determined to improve the situation for the thousands of people in North Wales who rely on these services.
I have absolutely zero confidence that Welsh Government targeted intervention in these extra areas on top of the other targeted intervention is going to make any difference at all in this health board. We need to kick the current leadership out that has been failing people for so long.
How many times do we have to come here and, quite frankly, listen to your cut and paste statements about more targeted interventions, more new directors, more tripartite meetings? You're like a broken record. It's a statement that you and your predecessors have made in various forms, time after time, month after month for the best part of the last decade. Frontline workers in North Wales are doing heroic work, but their government is fiddling whilst Rome burns.
Well, the Health Board says it's determined to make progress now to improve the experience and outcomes for patients.
There was also another debate, Kemlyn, about plans to reform the Senedd. What happened?
Yes, that's right. MS's debated a report by the Senedd Reform Committee. Now, that committee has backed proposals put forward last month by the Welsh Labour Government and Plaid Cymru to carry out what would be the most wide-ranging changes to the way this place works since devolution began back in 1999. The plans include increasing the number of MSs from 60 to 96, changing the electoral system, introducing gender quotas too. Now, this was a lengthy debate and there was criticism from the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrat member here of the way that Labour and Plaid Cymru had announced those proposals before the committee had actually completed its work. There were questions as well as to whether the government actually has power to introduce gender quotas, and the Conservatives think that all these proposals should be put to a referendum. referendum. Now, ministers here say that isn't necessary. They say they have a mandate to do this because Senedd reform was a manifesto commitment for 3 of the 4 parties here in the Senedd at the last election. Let's hear a flavour of that debate.
We have concluded, as has every single august body that preceded us, that the Senedd is categorically underpowered for the job it is asked to do. In short, there are too few of us, backbenchers, to do our job effectively in holding the government to account.
Let's have a referendum. This underhanded backroom deal struck between the First Minister and Adam Price goes against everything this socialist coalition claim they stand for.
Pursuit of gender balance should never be at the expense of genuine diversity and equality. I am proud of the fact that I am the first woman of colour to be elected here in the Welsh Parliament. But I did not get here and stand amongst you all today due to the colour of my skin.
Quotas can help us advance towards a true meritocracy, rather than being an obstacle to it. There are societal biases and obstacles which prevent more women from becoming politicians, from being in the room where decisions about their lives are made, which only leads to more structural inequality.
Investing in this institution will improve the governance of Wales, enhance the security and oversight of Welsh Government business, and lead to more effective policy, more efficient spending and better legislation.
Well, the Welsh Government will now try to bring forward the necessary legislation for all this by next summer, with the aim that everything's in place in time for the next election in 2026. By the way, for all these changes to be implemented, they'd need the backing of 2/3 of the Senedd members here. Between them, Labour and Plaid Cymru would have the necessary numbers.
Cemlyn, let's put party politics to one side for just a moment. What about that big, fantastic match? Did it get a mention?
Absolutely, yes. On Sunday, of course, Wales qualified for their first World Cup since 1958 when they beat Ukraine 1-0 at the Cardiff City Stadium. And at the start of the first session of the week here in the Senedd, the presiding officer, the Llywydd here, Elin Jones, congratulated the team on their success. And then during FMQs, Plaid Cymru's leader Adam Price asked the First Minister as well how he felt Wales could capitalise now on reaching the finals in Qatar.
Before we start the meeting and before any of you try and get in on being the first to congratulate the Welsh football team, let me be the person to do that on all our behalf and to say to the football team and the Football Association of Wales how proud we all are as a Senedd of their tremendous success.
The fact that even on this momentous occasion, the first thing the Welsh players did was to comfort the Ukrainian players and to applaud the Ukrainian supporters, I think was an encapsulation of the best of our Welsh values of compassion and internationalism. The Chief Executive, Noel Mooney, if we could only bottle that Celtic energy, he'd be more popular than Guinness. He said that they're not just the Football Association, they're a movement. And in so many ways, they embody the values of the Wales we want to see: modern, bilingual, creative, inclusive. So how can we use the World Cup with its unparalleled global audience to project that image of that Wales?
We will, as a government, be working alongside them and with them to make sure that we maximise the opportunity that Wales' exposure on that national stage, a first game against the USA. You know, I seem to remember President Trump saying that if Joe Biden were to win the presidential election, the USA would end up looking like Wales. I thought he played a significant part in Joe Biden's triumph in that election myself. But now we'll have an opportunity to show people across the USA just what Wales has to offer.
The First Minister there. Well, the Llywydd also assured MSs that when the World Cup takes place later this year, she'll make sure that none of the debates here clash with any of Wales's games.
You can see the excitement building. Cemlyn, thank you very much there at the Senedd. Let's return to Westminster with Susan Hume. Susan, the Northern Ireland Assembly isn't sitting at the moment due to that ongoing dispute over the protocol governing trade. But Northern Irish politics has been debated in both Houses of Parliament. Tell us what's been happening.
Well, first, there's a bill in the House of Lords. This actually stretches back to the last time power sharing broke down at Stormont. And it lasted for 3 years, then only came back in 2020. Part of the agreement to get everyone back at Stormont was this bill. It protects the Irish language in Northern Ireland, something Sinn Féin wants. It's also meant to protect the Ulster British identity on behalf of the Unionists. However, it was meant to be all about accord, but as we'll see, it's pretty controversial all the same.
My Lords, the context of the bill before the House this afternoon is the collapse of the devolved government from 2017 to 2020 and the intensive efforts over almost 3 years to restore it. While issues around language and identity were not the prime reason for the collapse in January 2017, during the subsequent Assembly election and beyond, the capacity of these issues to poison debate and paralyse politics in Northern Ireland became all too apparent.
It's called the Identity and Language Bill, but despite anything that anyone says, including the Minister, it's widely held to be known as a standalone Irish language bill, with a little bit of Ulster Scots put on at the side as a bit of a sop to the small but articulate Ulster Scots group in Northern Ireland. And it's also, I think very clearly, a ransom payment to Sinn Féin for holding Northern Ireland hostage for 3 years when they brought down the Assembly. The numbers of those who choose to speak the Irish language as a second language, no one is unilingual in Irish in Northern Ireland, in their daily living or on special occasions is minuscule. Were this a precondition of linguistic representation in the courts and in government offices, Polish and Cantonese speakers in Northern Ireland would, by dint of population and numbers speaking those languages, have prior claims.
This feels like a bill that was drafted not by the UK government, but indeed by the Irish Republic government, and set on breaking up the United Kingdom and placing Northern Ireland in a national state.
The UK government gave clear warning, my lords, in June last year, that if legislation on the Irish language had not been introduced into the Assembly by September, it would introduce it into the UK Parliament by October 2021. The DUP had once again blocked its passage.
I just think that everybody ought to calm down a bit and realise that things can happen which aren't going to be so difficult that it's going to mean something which weaponisation of the language would imply. It's not like that. It can be like that, but if you deal with it properly and sensitively, then indeed it needn't be.
And as we said, Susan, the DUP are currently refusing to take part in devolved government because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. The UK government has pledged to reform it or change it or perhaps even override parts of it. How far have they got?
Well, we're expecting a bill imminently, maybe early next week. However, critics say, wait a minute, you're the government who actually negotiated this deal, and now you're saying you want to chuck some of it out unilaterally. So the man who negotiated a lot of it on behalf of the government, Lord Frost, was in front of our parliamentary committee this week, and he was asked about how he'd got there. He was pointing out that he had taken over after Theresa May, her government, had negotiated a deal. Then Boris Johnson came in, got Lord Frost as his negotiator, and he was saying, it's really, I had to start with what I had there. So it was a pretty tense time. In fact, it sounded pretty nail-biting from what he said.
So what would you change to the UK's current arrangements for negotiation, scrutiny and implementation of treaties and international agreements?
So, I mean, to summarise what's come up, I suppose, in this hearing, I would say there does need to be more parliamentary involvement in a defined set of important international agreements. The Parliament should be given time to express a view on those at the start and debate them. There should be, at least for the most important ones, the Executive and Parliament should find a way of, at least in very broad terms, keeping up to date about what's going on in the negotiation, and there should be a yes or no vote at the end before ratification.
David Frost giving his reflections there. Now, Michael Gove has been in the House, Susan, too, giving more details about his plans for levelling up. How did that go?
Yeah, I mean, the government would very much like to move on from confidence votes and leadership challenges, all that kind of thing, and move on to things like levelling up, which was one of their flagship policies. So we did have in the Commons the first debate, big debate on the bill that is partly meant to do that. It's to do with things like infrastructure and improving housing, trying to bring other areas back to the kind of level of richer places like London and the South East, for example. However, Labour are a bit critical. They suggest there might be a bit of pork barrel politics going on. They suspect that the government's been giving more money to areas where they want to get votes. And in fact, there was quite a spat when they suggested that one area had been given money to encourage the local Conservative MP to support Boris Johnson in the vote. And he did take exception to that, I must say.
Today's bill looks specifically at how we can ensure that the government's levelling up missions laid out in our white paper published in February can be given effect, how we can have a planning system that prioritises urban regeneration and the use of brownfield land, and how we can strengthen our democratic system overall. We need to tackle some of the things that generate urban blight. We need to deal with the problem of empty shops, vacancies, and voids on our high street, which not only depress economic activity, but also contribute to a lower footfall and less of a sense of purpose, buzz, and energy in our communities.
What is a missed opportunity here is ensuring that public sector-owned assets, such as land and buildings, including police stations, should be able to be sold for slightly below market value, where a GP surgery or indeed social housing associations wanting to build social housing. He's aware I've been campaigning for this on Teddington Police Station in my own constituency. The Labour mayor wants to sell it to the highest bidder for luxury housing, even though the community wants a new GP surgery and more affordable housing. Will he put that provision in this bill?
Well done. Here, here. Well, this is a first. Well, certainly for the last 7 years. This is the first time for 7 years, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there's been a Lib Dem policy proposal that makes sense. I'm nostalgic for those coalition years.
This bill has been brought on a day when the reality of the government's record on levelling up has been laid bare in new figures published by the ONS out today that show that London alone, of the regions of the UK, has had a post-pandemic recovery that has far outstripped the rest of us. So how is it that he's come to this House with lots of jokes and lots of smart phrases, lots of slogans, but nothing in this bill that will turn this around? Yeah. Then I saw that the member for the Isle of Wight, just give me a moment, the member for the Isle of Wight said he'd voted for the Prime Minister to keep his job after receiving assurances that there would be a funding review for his council. Did he have knowledge of this? Did he sign it off? Because let me say to him, that sounds awfully like corruption from me, and please let me...
She completely misunderstands and she gets it completely wrong. Several years ago, the Prime Minister realised that the Isle of Wight was the only island in the UK that doesn't have a multiplier. So the Scilly Isles gets a multiplier of 1.5, the Scottish Islands gets the Scottish Islands Needs Allowance. And I said to the Prime Minister, will you commit to rectifying this wrong, which is a policy flaw? And he said yes. And I reminded him of that promise beforehand. So did I ask for a bag of cash? No. And it is completely untrue for her to say that. So she can get up now and apologise. Yeah.
I will rephrase my words in a manner that is far more acceptable to you. This looks awfully dodgy to me, Secretary of State.
Lisa Nandy there. Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you to all of our guests this week. Politics UK will be back next Friday, and I'll be here on Monday at 12:15 with Politics Live. Have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.